Hello. So I thought I would do just a little test run of doing like a quick follow along tutorial. I've not actually done follow along tutorials before, so this is quite new to me. If you hear noise in the background, my dogs are in the room, so apologies. So what you're going to need obviously is your paints. Look at that, it's a great mess. So it makes really good greys, so I like to keep some of that on there. I do have a towel, like an old painting towel, at the ready in case I have far too much water on the brush. 2 canisters of clean water. I've taped my paper down, and the paper I'm using is it's a Winsor & Newton Professional 300 weight knot grain. I'm using a Harkay brush. I'll see why in a minute. They're really important for glazing and this one's molting apparently. Putting on layers and just like wetting your paper really. I find that really helpful, and it's so super soft. It's unbranded. I bought it from Norwich Art Supplies quite some time ago. I don't know what brand that is, but it doesn't say. I'm using a Zero Da Vinci, one of those brushes, what, a mop brush or something, and a size 4 Da Vinci mop brush. This is all I'll use for painting my sky. So, and one of these, very important, I feel, for working with wet on wet, because especially in the summer things can dry up, and I like to also use it to just like spruce up my pan before I start, just activate all of the colours. And whilst that's doing, I will wet down my paper. I also use a hairdryer, so this is how I work if I'm in the studio. I'll use a hairdryer to dry between glazes. So if you've got that, or you've got, I don't know, some proper type of drying tool, then that's great. So I'm just putting my Harkay brush into clean water, and I'm going to just completely wet this down. Now in my head I already have like a plan compositionally. So you want to think about firstly where your light's coming from. Secondly, the composition of the rest of your picture, because if you're having, like, I don't know, you're doing a landscape and you've got like a path or a river going off to one side, or you've got it going down the centre or just off centre, and you want to like have your horizon point somewhere in the picture, you might want to do your clouds to create depth. So if you've got like a river flowing in this way, you might want clouds coming this way, because then you get like a real good sense of depth perspective. And of course, that's what you want as an artist, landscape artist, is to create the illusion of depth of 3D on a, flat piece of paper. So I always start off with a cool blue. So I think this is, I don't know, it might be cobalt, something like that. And I will go in and I'll say, okay, so let's have something coming down the centre, for instance. We want the centre to be our centre of focus. So I'm going to build up my clouds with that in mind. Because I just want to create that illusion of depth, really. And so I'm just painting around what would be like the top of some clouds, and then like bringing in the sky. Hasn't got to be exact, because you don't really want to be creating exactness. you want the viewer to get involved with the painting, with you in the process. So like if you just put too much in, then it becomes something that they can't get involved. You want the viewer to get involved mentally, like the brain to be figuring bits out for themselves, and then it's like they become emotionally involved. You know, become part of the process of viewing the picture. If that makes sense. So that's that bit. I'm probably going to go in for, oh no, there's something on my palette. It's a mixture of probably Industhrone blue and Winsor & Newton's Payne's Grey, which is quite indigo-y actually. And then I'm just going to bring in something like this. So maybe it's going to be a cloudy sky. It's drying over this side. So what I do in that instance is use my spray bottle and just put spray it up. So also what you can do is, if you want to, because it's nice to have some like lost and found edges on your clouds. So if you just like dry parts of it, I think specifically in the middle, because you want the viewer's eye to be in the middle. I don't really like that hard edge, so just clean that up. Okay, so I'm going to come in with a darker blue now across that top. So I'm going to use, I think this is like I'm just mixing with that mud that I had in there. I think it's a Winsor Blue Warm. I think that's what it is called. And then just kind of make, I don't know, just some like sort of definition to what's going on up here. And if that's too much, then you just wet your brush and just let that become fuzzy again. You can just move that around a little bit. Still, I don't like that. Let's make that just one big, yeah, that's better. It looked too repetitious. Repetitious. Me and my words. So we'll drag that down actually. I think that might be interesting. So back into that, what was it? Industhrone and blue. Okay, we'll do the same over here. Just get some of that colour in there. I don't want any lines forming. Okay, so you can see what's going on. We've got some clouds forming. So I want to just soften. I don't want any hard lines on the outer parts of the picture. I want the viewer's eye to be set in the middle, and if not set in the middle, moving around in the picture. So we'll just soften some of that. And then, like I said, we'll make these bits here our hard lines, our found lines. It's like this. So, oh, I like that. Let's just put that back in. Yeah, a bit of movement in the clouds, good. You don't want it to be too static, I suppose. Move that a little bit. Yeah, I think that's good. So on top of these clouds, I want a warm colour. I tend to use what is that? Raw sienna? I think it's raw sienna. It's quite a bit like a golden, got a bit like golden colour, but I'm going to warm it up a little bit with some, where's alizarin, just a little bit of alizarin, just to warm that up. And that will mix a little bit with the cobalt that was on my page. So just let that mix with what you had in there. Again, I don't want any hard lines, so just going to do this thing really. And then just mix a little bit more blue in with that as I come down. A bit more of that raw sienna. I like raw sienna because rather than what was the other one called? My brain's gone. Yellow ochre, because it's not as opaque as yellow ochre. Now I'm not afraid of opaque colours. I like opaque colours because they all have a place on, everything has a place on the palette, of course. I'm going to get that out, let that be for a minute. Everything has a place on the palette, and out. But if I'm doing a sky, I don't really want to be using immediately on my lower glazes anything that's too opaque, really. So you've got a little bit of you've got some interesting things going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dry this off. So I'll pause, dry this off. So I've dried it off with the hair dryer. If you were doing work in plein air, you would just simply wait for it to be dry, because how I like to do this next bit is it's called glazing, and I like to glaze wet on wet. So I will go over and wet it again, and it has to be with one of these really soft half K brushes, because if you try to do it with a rough brush, you're going to lift the pigment that you've already laid down on the paper off again, because you can lift paint, but in this circumstance I want to leave it where it is. So nice gentle brush strokes with a nice soft brush. So now what I'm going to mix up is what I had before, and I just want to cool it down actually. So I think I'm going to use that Windsor Blue Warm, and maybe a little bit of that, I think it's cobalt I've got. I want to cool that sky down a bit actually. For me, that's too warm for what I'm going for. So I can just go round this again, nice and gently. Look what I've done. I don't want to do that, so I'll just lift that off immediately. And just put some of this cooler blue into the sky. Never any mistakes in watercolour, because, you know, glazing is a thing, which is just wonderful, and that's how I like to work. It's less scary than trying to do everything in one hit, I find. And again, you can soften your edges. If they're coming too far over what you already painted that you'd like, then you can just blot them off. Okay, like so. Even like, at this point I like to make weird marks in the sky, because skies aren't perfect. So so I like to do something like that, or some just weird stuff going on up there. So that should cool that down somewhat. And whilst that's still wet, let's get some raw sienna in that mix of blue that you just made. Now don't cry because it's going to go green. And we're going to use, don't worry, we will use it in the sky. Just mix that up. Bit of raw sienna. Put that in there, that goes green. And then just put a little bit of alizarin crimson in there. You'll see how that turns into like a warm grey. I'm just going to just bring some of that into the picture. I want to soften that. I don't want it to become like a feature on the cloud, but more just like a shadow. And this, it looks really subtle, and it is subtle because that's what we're going for today. So again, remember, brush strokes down into this centre because that's where we're going to be working towards bringing that perspective in. And yeah, so a bit more of that colour, darker actually, and just bring in some. I'm still working with the big brush, you know, still working with the big brush. So put that colour down, then rinse off the brush, and then just fan them out. So that, I don't know, there might be distant clouds or something, you know. But try to make sure that you get that perspective. So I really want to bring my brush strokes down like that, if I can. Okay, that's, I think I'm happy with. So as that's drying, I'm just going to let it dry just slowly for a minute, because what you've already got is damp canvas, and that's helpful for the next part, because in the very distance of your landscape painting, you don't want anything to have hard edges, because you want to make it sort of like out of focus, if you will. So the atmospheric perspective, where there's a lot of space between you and something, creates a blurring, it creates a muting of colour, and the contrasts between light and shadow are very minimal. And of course, most importantly, you want to keep those colours cooler, because when something's cooler, it pushes it back. If something's warmer, it brings it into the foreground. So basically, this is where your knowledge of mixing greys is going to really come in handy. That's why I keep all of my mud on my palette. You know, I rarely clean it off. Sorry, I'm drinking coffee. Now, for this bit, I'm probably going to go on to this one. So, still drying, so bear that in mind. So, yeah, we've got some, like, time to just mix up something. So I want, obviously, the whole picture to tie in. So I want in this colours that I've already used. So Windsor Blue Warm, Indrathine, I think it was Cobalt, I'm going to put in a little bit of alizarin, just the tiniest amount, only because it's already in the sky, and I want it to work, the colours to come together. So again, you put in a little bit of your raw sienna, and it's going to be, I want it a little bit more pigmented than my sky, because I want it to come forward, more forward than my sky in that background. So making sure that you've got enough pigment in your mix. It's quite thick, really. So whilst that's still wet, I'm going to make a distant horizon line. So just be really quick with it. You haven't got to make any definite brush marks at all. Just keep it moving all the way across, and not worry about making anything look like anything. That's what you want. You don't want it to look like anything. You can mix in some other colours, maybe a little bit of, oh, I think I'm going to go for, what is that? Like green or something. I think it's olive green. I'll just put into that as well. And then you just make some like, there might be something going on. Nothing definite. Like I say, nothing definite. Maybe there's some field or something going on in the background. Who knows? Then one trick that I have learned, oh God, have one line. Don't ever have lines butting up to each other. Do you know what I mean? You don't want to do that. You always want to just have one definite line. Okay, so that's just going to let that dry a little bit more, and as that dries a little bit more, this darker mix back into a bit more green. Ooh. Ooh. And I'll put I put a bit more olive green into that mix that we first used. Just into these centre bits, you know, where I wanted the focus to be, and everything else can just melt away. Okay, so still, it's very cool still. Can you see, even though I've put green in there, it's still very muted because I've got it mixed with all those other colours that are already in there. So they're mixing together real nice. And just, you know, play around with it, let it move. And if it starts coming up too much, then that's fine. Just get a dry brush and just try to control it a little bit. Because it can stop bleeding up. That's okay, because like I say, you want it to be blurred, so to speak. And I don't want that hard line there, so let's just get rid of that. So there we go. So we're slowly getting there. I think at this point, that big green that I've just used for like the highlights, I'm going to just bring that over the whole of the bottom of the landscape. See what happens. Be brave. Sometimes it's nice to just see actually just what's going to happen when you just apply the colour and let it be. As of course, I'm not going to want that too hard in the background, so soften these lines just a little bit. That I like. And then that'll be that. That's going to be my That's going to be my base coat. So there you've got a base coat of a painting. And at that point, I'm going to dry it off. So it's completely dry. And I'm really happy with this so far. I think it's going well. I've got all of the lines here that I wanted to create in the sky to create that depth perspective that has beautifully come out in whatever this will be. Maybe like a windy river or some part of a fen. We've created grey, green type colour for this background. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but there's lots of, like where we went over with like highlights, lowlights with that greeny colour, it's created interest. Not too much interest, but just enough for the viewer to believe that's distant land. It's land in the landscape really far in the background. So for this next part, and then I'm going to leave it there, just going to quickly put in a tree line. Okay, I've got to decide where I'm going to do that. I think I'm going to do it on this side because I like this side better with regards to the clouds and stuff. Okay, so we're just making this up really. So once again, I've got that colour still wet that we just used for this. So into that mix, I'm going to put in, what should I put in there? Let's look in, I think it's perylene green. It goes really dark, and I'm going to use a bit of, what's that called? It's gold. Quinacridone gold. I think actually first I'm going to just use like a bit of a grey off of my palette just to put in and guide me where I want to go. So I'm probably going to have to put it in along here. So let's have a look. So we want the perspective, of course. So we've got to make them look like they are. Getting further away. This is like skeleton. Skeleton of trees. Okay. And then just land them into the landscape and blend it. So then I'm going to go into that colour that I just made. I don't want too much, so I'm dabbing it because I want actually to create some texture, not too much texture. So I've got to close off this side, haven't I, really, so the viewer's eye stays in the picture a bit. I've got another muddy colour in there, so I'm going to use that just to give it some interest. So I'm kind of like laying my brush on the side, trying to just create the shapes of that trees might have, and just I'm putting more perylene green in it as I'm going back because I want it just to appear a little bit cooler. Can you see how that's just a little bit cooler? And then again, I might even put a bit of blue in with that actually, just as we go back even further. It only got to be subtle changes in the colours that you're using. And then again, I'm just going to put some of that underneath the trees, just to land them on the ground a bit. And probably bring some of that actually into these trees here, just to give them a bit of ooh la la. Like shadows, I suppose. Okay, and then I want to clean the brush properly, will you? Just soften what I've done there. So now we've got this line of trees going on. So we'll decide now what shadow colour. So what goes good as a shadow against green? I think is it. I'm going to, in that green that I've been using, I'm going to put a bit of alizarin crimson and a bit of Winsor and Newton's Payne's Grey, which is very indigo-y. It's quite cool. And I'm just going to look at these tree trunks. And look at where the shadows of these trees might be. That's what I'm doing. So this is quite a blue. It's quite bluey, which is nice. I'll just close it up a little bit actually. I think there's too much light coming through there, so we'll just close that up. And right at the edge, I don't want the eye looking at that really, so I'll close that right in with that shadow colour that we're using now. I want to keep some of these possible tree trunk branches kind of. I'm going in with more of that Payne's Grey and just dotting some more of that in, really. Now the next I'm going to put a little bit more of Nectar Gold. Just bringing in a bit of that colour in. I hope you can see. I mean, you should be able to see, shouldn't you? Just dotting that in really. As and when, a bit more of that Payne's Grey, just to give way to some more shadows on this tree. If you want to, you can also create like highlights by just touching something out. So that needs to now be cooler. So I'm going to add a little bit more blue, some of that, I think it's Indrathane blue, so that I can get some, oh that's too much. Looks like a little bit more. That's better. Look at that. Get away. Shadows on here. gold into that actually, because that's too blue. I want some interest up here, and just around the edges. Payne's grey. So you're building up colour by shadow work, shadowing your way through, really. And just like as we can see, like in the process, I'm just like putting little straight lines and things in. I'm going to mix this up now. I'm going to put a bit of that lighter blue, which I believe is cobalt, and use that because again it's a little bit cooler, and I can go in this entry with that and the Payne's grey again, and it should read as further away really. And then again I want to land it, so I'm going to just bring that, just land it all into the ground underneath it. Create some interest into that. I'll just paint it on. I'm using actually like a mixture of the colour we've just used, whatever's on my palette really. So as I come forward, I've got this weird sort of browny beige colour on my palette, so I'm just using that in the foreground in this bit here because it's closer, so I want it a bit warmer. So here we go. So that's interesting. Interesting start to the painting. We're actually at 37 minutes now, so I'm going to leave it there. And on the next video, I'm going to talk about what I was talking about earlier, and that's not fearing the opaques, the opaque colours. I'm going to be using all sorts of mixes. I'm going to be using like buff titanium, white, an opaque grey that I created myself using white and Payne's grey. What's that yellow called? I've forgotten now. Totally gone from my brain. So we'll be using some opaques, an opaque yellow that I made as well, to create the illusion of light. So that's the end of part 1, and look forward to seeing you in part 2. Give yourself a dry off and have some fun.